Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How's
Ed.
everyone doing? Welcome,
Excellent.
everybody, to Line Up Online. We are in episode 535, the Apostle Paul's famous last words and what they mean for us. And this week we have Chris Anderson, the famous Hogjaw, Stan, and Dr. Ricks as always. And if you would start us out, Dr. Ricks, that would be great.
Okay, today we're going to try some senior groaners. This senior says, just once, I want the username and password prompt to say, close enough. Actually, we got several cards and we all have PIN numbers in there. Anyway, it's easy to get something mixed up. The older you get, PIN words, be nice if they can say, close enough. But anyway.
Get a good password manager. You won't have any problem.
Yeah. Well, as a senior, if ever I'm on life support and they unplug me, I want them to wait a couple seconds, then plug me back in to see if it might work.
They needed to do that to the whole internet this last couple days.
It works with a lot of electronic stuff. When it doesn't work, turn it off and unplug it. Do you ever wake up in the morning as a senior and you look in the mirror and you think, that can't be accurate? That can't be me. Anyway, we celebrated last night with 2 adult drinks, Metamucil and Ensure. Now, this is the piece de resistance. If Adam and Eve were Cajuns, they would have eaten the snake instead of the apple. If any of the Cajuns are upset with that, feel free to email me, and I'll blame it on the person that gave me the joke. But somehow I like that one. There are people who do eat snakes, possum. You don't want to hear about it, but it's true. Actually, there was a song that was sung at the feast about 4 or 5 years ago. It's a song about this couple was saying, we're going to eat high tonight. There's roadkill on site.
If you think about it, it's already grilled.
Yeah. A little bit of unhealthy news there for you. Well, the Apostle Paul's famous last words. What did they mean? And what were they? And what did they mean for Timothy and for us? I thought we'd start off with an overview. There are great commentaries that have a lot more to say, but I just thought we could start off by just mentioning Paul was in Rome under arrest. I'm not exactly sure what his prison conditions were. It depends on who you read, but he was still pushing the gospel, but expecting execution. And they actually, historians believe he and Peter both were martyred in Rome in 66 or 67 AD. And the good thing for Paul, I'm saying good, that's what, Paul got a quick execution. He was beheaded behind Caesar's throne. Quick. I mean, that's quick. By the way, do you know what the term tip comes from? Well, back in the days in England, when off with his head meant something, they could take you to the Tower of London and the king would have your head chopped off. People who got that sentence, they would pay the executioner to sharpen the tip of his blade. Give me good service where it's quick.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that would be.
And it just as an aside, I know it's political, but I thought it was smart of Trump to take the taxes off tips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and also give the advice from a waitress.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
to me, that's getting down to the layman level and listening to the layman on the street, you know, and I think that went a long ways.
I'm tempted to say, if it's an honest election, I don't see how he can lose, but I know I could be kidding myself, but we'll see, I guess. But that was Paul's condition. And so he's writing like George Washington's famous farewell address. He's writing a farewell letter to Timothy, basically giving him the torch of leadership and encouraging him to keep the movement that he has especially in Eastern part of the Roman Empire, to keep it going strong. And I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what is amazing about that transition too is that we don't have a word of Timothy's sermons, writings, letters, anything. Mm-hmm. We have nothing that Timothy ever said or did or wrote. And even though he was obvious succeeded Paul in this office here of taking care of these churches, and important churches too. They're in Asia Minor, Ephesus being the one. They believe he was in Ephesus here when Paul wrote to him, and he was giving him all these instructions out of these letters here in First Timothy, especially the doctrinal issues, false prophets, and the order of church, how elders and ministers were to be selected. It is fascinating to me that we don't have a book of Timothy, because he played such an important role in that time frame.
Never thought of that, but that is true. By the way, when you read one of Paul's other letters, he mentioned that Timothy had gotten out of jail. I assume he was jailed in Rome too at one time. He said Timothy's been released. We don't have any details. That's all it just says. Timothy's been released. So he had some persecution himself. But obviously Timothy's a great man. And I always like the part where he tells Timothy, you might have told some other young evangelists as well, don't let them look down at you because you're so young.
Yeah.
See, that's a problem we used to have, right?
You sort of get the sense that Paul is, you can tell he's concerned about the church and the work that he's done. He spent this last, 40 years growing the church, building these church groups, and now he's helpless, with the exception of being able to write some letters and some visitors there that can go back to these church groups. I would imagine and we read from these letters that he knew that his time was drawing near. And so he had this urgency, I believe, to try to build up those men that he felt were capable of continuing the work of the church and continuing growing these groups and taking care of these groups. And I'm thankful that he did. But I can sort of feel that in his letter when you read those, that he wanted to do all he could to support those guys and get them off to a good start, because not only would he instruct Timothy to do this work, he wanted Timothy to instruct others that could teach and continue on as well. So he was looking several generations down the line there. So,
and one thing we know historically, the church in Corinth at least was still fighting for the truth about Passover and days of unleavened bread 4 centuries later, because the papacy is mad at them. And it's you have to read their enemies' writings, but that tells you, you realize that church lasted maybe 4 or more centuries. And then I think of how worldwide, well, anyway, just real high. That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you wonder, when you think about that, why didn't Paul pick John as a successor? Because John was an apostle and he was still alive. And, we know that John went on to write the book of Revelation and the books of John, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, but I guess those two men had different purposes. Paul being one that was more of an evangelist, and as well, he even calls Timothy an evangelist. And I guess John had some sort of a prophetic purpose, in writing what he did, and so they didn't even really correspond with one another in these letters, or mention them in these letters. And I think that's sort of fascinating. You wonder what the connections were and how they did. Of course, we know John did come back and was the elder there at Ephesus at some point in time. The bishop at Ephesus as well. So their roads must have crossed paths and came back together many times.
I've often wondered, Paul probably, what we think, and what one expert said, Paul spent maybe 25 hard years on the road, 6, 7 months, a mob would run him out of the city, he'd be shipwrecked. You go through the book of Acts and you realize he spent 25, possibly more, hard years on the road. No permanent home and all kinds of stuff going on. And he had some beatings, and even though God didn't let him die, he came close a number of times. And one time, they actually thought he was dead.
Yeah, he also picked Timothy because Timothy's father was a Greek, and his mother was a Jewish lady. And I was thinking about that a while ago. I thought, Timothy's mother was Jewish and he was Greek. I bet his grandmother didn't like that when they were first engaged to be married, because that was sort of out of the circle of a Jewish family to marry someone from a heathen nation, or maybe not a heathen nation, but certainly a Gentile nation. But eventually, I guess he came around and became an advocate for the church. But think about the selection Paul made. He couldn't have made a better selection to have a man who had a Jewish wife, but also was someone who could speak to the Gentiles, the Greeks in that region there. So he was multifunctional as a minister and an evangelist. So I think that played a lot of part in the selection that Paul made.
And by the way, it was a cataclysmic point in history, probably 2 or 3 years before the destruction of the Jewish nation, destruction of Jerusalem. And the Jews, there was a little more to it than just what happened in that one siege, but that was the major part of it. The Jews were basically dispersed until 1948.
Yeah.
And it happened, and it's like Paul was getting the church ready for cataclysmic events that would hit them, because the church would have been in the general category of the Jewish people as far as outsiders were concerned. So they would have been impacted by it as well. But we don't really know a whole lot of details about what happened to Christians when the Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem. But it was rough on the Jews for a while.
It makes you wonder if did they have a sense of knowing that something catastrophic was about to happen? And did they know how close they were to that event actually happening? I mean, you're talking only just a few years away. What do we think this happened, Dr. Ricks, in 67, 68 AD? And Jerusalem was sacked in 70, 71 AD. I mean, you're talking 2 or 3 years down the road, and they're writing letters here, and they're discussing the world is upside down. I'm in prison. You're out there. You need to continue the work. Be bold. Be faithful, and don't worry about your age. Preach the truth. I mean, he goes on and gives him this litany of things to do. And how could they have known that only 3 years later the world would be turned upside down? And I think it says a lot to where we are today. we go along every day, and we've got to be watching and paying attention, because we can find ourselves in a similar situation of being so very close to, catastrophe and not being ready spiritually.
Yep. I don't want to really interrupt the flow we got going here, but we do have quite a few verses to get through, and we're 15 minutes in, and we haven't touched one yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Just to say, the letter also shows his love. Would you read the first one, please, Ken?
Greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also.
This much I do know. Jewish people, if your mother is Jewish, you're considered Jewish. I know that because Van married a Jewish woman, had 2 kids. My only point is, but his father wouldn't let him get circumcised. So you can see the problem that was there. But he would have been considered Jewish. But isn't it interesting, the influence of mothers and grandmothers?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And
they must have been remarkable women. I could just are very strong women, remarkable, smart, devoted, women that played such an influence on him, and it left a lasting impression on him.
for what it was worth, I know it's harder in today's world because things are all messed up, and the kids are on devices, but we grandparents should try to have whatever influence we can. Right? Do what you can. But it's good. I think it really is tougher for parents too, but even tougher for grandparents to influence kids now.
Things that you don't think they would remember. Grandkids, there's an impression there that they will remember. They might remember a lot of things, but they will remember some of the things that you said and did to them. I think it's important.
If this too political, forgive me, but if you saw Trump's granddaughter, that was impressive, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. She stole the show there for a moment. And I can't imagine how proud he was of her for doing that.
I mean, you compare his family to Biden's family. Oh, well, we'll get off on that.
Well, you could point out, though, on a strong grandparent influence, not to be political, but listen to J.D. Vance's story of him talking about how much influence his, I will say mamaw too, because that's what they are to me, of how much influence she had on his life, and it shows.
It does, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I like that guy. I guess, we'll see, but I think it looks good all the way around. It looks good. Mm-hmm. Let's read 2 Timothy 1:6, please, Ken.
Therefore, I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me, prisoner. For in this reason I also suffer these things. Nevertheless, I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep what I have committed to him until that day.
Let's discuss for a minute stirring up the spirit that's within you. Or the gift that God's given you. There are people who are good encouragers, good at serving others, good at making people. They're good at doing things and making it work. They're good. They have great people skills. Mm-hmm. I think that's a tremendous gift.
Anything you can do. Go ahead, Dr. Rich. Well, anything you can do to motivate people to the positive side, to This is a pretty loud message that Paul is saying here, trying to encourage Timothy to keep up. But the gist of it is he sees bad things coming, and he's sort of like what we've heard here recently in politics. You've got to decide now what side you're going to be on. Don't wait till the time the event happens to determine, well, which side am I going to be on? And I think Paul is sort of saying this to Timothy now. Make that decision now. Sort of exercise in your mind. Go through some scenarios and sort of exercise your faith now, so that when it does come, you will be grounded in your decision, and you won't be affected spiritually or emotionally or even physically or mentally about what's happens in the world. You will have already made your decision on which side of the fence you're going to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought stir up means you think about what you think the Spirit has given you. Whatever it is, stir it up and use it. Help others.
In the book of Revelation, it talks about Ephesus and all those churches. Essentially Jesus is telling those churches to do the same thing. You can get a lesson from each of those churches, what he told them to do to try to stir up, to rekindle the fire, to fan the flames, whatever it is that you have to do to reinvigorate your relationship with God. And we know what those are. It's prayer and reading your Bible and meditating about the grace and glory of God, and those things. Put your mind on those things instead of letting the world drag you down. And I think that has a big part in stirring and stoking up the fire that you have within you. And I believe you can do that and be if you go through those simple exercises.
Certainly sounds it. Yeah, stir up what you've got. Use it or you'll lose it. One of those expressions. But yeah, do it. And I think all that is really good for us. Also, there's a little touch of him saying, you want to be committed. I am not ashamed. Even if some of our doctrines become politically incorrect, really unpopular, we should stick with it, and the people who proclaim it.
Many of them already are. Some of them in other countries are against the law to utter.
I heard a bunch of Christians, I don't remember the details, but if you don't support the Trinity, you're politically, as far as they're concerned, you cannot be a Christian.
Yeah. Someday our biggest persecutors may be Christians.
Yeah, I believe that too. I believe that will be our most serious enemy at that time.
If you think about it, anybody who's not a Christian couldn't care less what we have to say.
That's right. They have not cared less for 2,000 years.
Why would they start now?
Other Christians, or so-called Christians, have been the worst persecutors of the church in the past. And I think it will be again at some point in time.
Yep. We have my sister-in-law found out we did what we believe, and she told my wife, she said, so you do the Jew thing? No, the J thing. She didn't even say the word Jew. She said, you do the J thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I should have asked her, did she spit after she said that?
Because
history is full of what some organizations will do if you don't adhere to their beliefs.
Oh yeah.
They'll torture you. They have killed. They have done all sort of things in the name of their religion. Just because someone else said, I don't see it that way.
That's been the cause for some authors to write books and make statements that the cause of all of the problems in the world is religion.
Yep.
Yeah.
That statement has been made many times. And, the first time I heard it, I was baffled by that statement. But when you think about it, yeah, false religion certainly is a foundational problem with the world, because they are so adamant, and if no one follows their way of thinking, they're willing to kill you over it and extinguish you out of existence if you don't believe like they do. And it does create great animosity in the world.
Yeah, I lost some. Not that it was a big deal, it didn't hurt me that much, but certain key people I was getting friendly with, and I probably didn't handle it well. When they found out I didn't keep Christmas, they didn't really say a whole lot, but I could tell, you're not a real Christian. You're some kind of crazy person. And maybe because I was black, they didn't want to argue with me too much. They just kind of withdrew. So you never saw them again, or very rarely. And just because you don't keep Christmas, and some people pork as well, they think you're crazy, or at least odd.
Yeah.
But they won't tell you that. They won't, get in your face, but they feel it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's nothing we can do about it. I probably could have handled them more delicately, but that's how life goes. Let them have the bad news with a little more, I don't know, what's the word for getting it in a way that's doesn't offend them? I can't think of the word now.
Just a little more gently.
Gently, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, anyway, they didn't go over too well. But, of course, didn't Europe have the 30 Years' War all about religion? And then didn't they have 100 Years' War in Europe? I gotta double check those details, but I believe that's a fact.
Well, right now they're having
Christians.
They're having all kinds of troubles in Europe based on religion. It's Muslims trying to take over London and France and other countries, and I mean it's over religion right now.
Oh, I heard there's a major city, maybe fourth or fifth biggest city in England. Some incident happened, and the guy, this is a British news guy saying it, he thinks Muslim radicals and some other non-Christian radicals, and they have anarchists there too, have used it to get in the streets and they're burning and rioting. And the British police don't carry guns normally, and they're not that many. The police, he said, lost control of the streets.
They did.
And I can't remember the name of the city. It's not one that I think it's Leeds, Leeds, but not sure. And of course, he blames the Muslims and the anarchists. He said, any excuse. I think the police had to come in and break up a fight with some family. I don't know. But he says it's just an excuse. He says they don't really love England and they're tearing England apart. I mean, that's his opinion. And any excuse to riot and loot. We had that, 2020 in this country too. Any excuse will do.
Yeah, and depending on how things go this fall, we could see it more than we've ever seen it in our life. Because if it looks like if the election doesn't go their way, they're going to take to the street and they'll burn everything down they can get their hands on.
Just like they did in Paris, at least for a while.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would imagine if you're in a blue city, it could be rough. What do you think?
Yes, I would not want to be in one.
Mm-mm.
Anytime, actually. Sometimes I don't even like driving through some of them, but hey, got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should, like you said, Ken, it doesn't seem like God's calling many people in big blue cities these days.
Doesn't seem like it. When I go to the Chicago area, there's a route, I forget what it is. It goes right up along. They want me to take that route. I don't know if it's 94 or whatever it is, right through Chicago. I'll go to like 271, or if I'm really not feeling it, I'll go clear over to 355, way around. I'll drive an extra 45 minutes to avoid Chicago.
Oh, that's wise. I used to, they have an expressway in the South Side called the Dan Ryan.
Yep.
That's not what people really call it.
I bet they didn't. And it's always backed up. Every time I drive through there, that route is always backed up.
And there are gas stations and places you don't want to get off on. But
No,
anyway,
they close it dark.
you not want. And if people in Chicago are mad at me for saying this, and you love the Dan Ryan, you have bad taste. Ken, would you read? Here's something I do think. We do have to prepare for deception and persecution. Now, here's what I now think. Some people will face very light persecution and some heavier persecution. I think you could probably make that case in the Bible and people that you know. But either way, you have to be ready. Because you might be lucky and the only persecution you'll get will be from family members who think you are, why are you doing this? And I'm not getting any Christmas cards and stuff. And that may be a little tough, from relatives. But others have lost jobs or promotions been blocked because they had to work on the Sabbath. And it could get worse than that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, look what happened in Germany when they turned their attention away from a group of people. They considered them inferior. And will they ever consider Christianity and Jewish people and, put them in the same basket and consider them inferior people? They're the problems for all the world's problems.
Mm-hmm.
They're the reason for all the world's problems. And how quickly society could turn on you, and that could be extremely difficult. It was for the Jewish people in Germany and all, Poland and many of those other towns and cities across Germany and in that region.
I think that'll probably be, that probably would obviously be the work of the beast, the false prophet.
But when people find out what you actually do believe, what is the first thing that they ask? It's what you already said, Ken. They ask, so are you Jewish?
Oh, yeah.
That I've been asked that multiple times. No, I'm a Christian. But when you talk about the Sabbath day or the holy days, that you're automatically considered Jewish, to normal, just everyday people.
It's natural for us to understand it. It's natural for us. We live this, and some of you've been in here 40, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So to us, it's natural, but to the outside world, we are quite the anomaly.
Yeah.
And just remember, the Sabbath is the sign of the God you worship. And we worship, this is the English word, Jehovah. It probably was Jehovah in Hebrew. Well, we worship Jehovah, the true God of the Bible. And that's his day, the day he made sacred by resting on it. So when you don't keep it, you're missing out on the sign that shows you which God you should worship. It's really a big deal, but I think most people think, it's not a big deal. Why don't you go to Sunday like everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a big deal to God.
That's all that matters.
He called it by name. He called it by name. He gave it a title. He told us what day of the week it was. And he made the Israelites observe it for 40 years. He drummed it into their head what day the Sabbath was by giving them manna 6 days and none on the Sabbath day. It was like, it wasn't okay to observe another day. It had to be the Sabbath day.
Yeah.
And it still is.
Would you read 2 Timothy 2:1, please, Ken?
You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to a faithful men who will be able to teach others also. You therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ.
As I said, some people have more hardship to endure than others, but you have to, I'm sure he was helping Timothy get his mind ready.
I agree, Dr. Ricks, and he doesn't promise them that you're going to have a bed of roses, that life is going to be easy for you. And I'm also reminded again of the book of Revelation. I believe it says, endure to the end, and I'll give you a crown of life. God says you're going to You're going to suffer persecution, but endure to the end. You got to stick with it. You got to just see your way through it, and with God's help, and the reward is not even, can't even describe what the reward will be because of your faithfulness as a result.
Yep.
And if we are, say, 8 or 9 years away from the return of Christ, people say, well, I got plenty of time to get myself together. You don't really know that with absolute certainty.
No.
Actually, I had some stories here about people. It was kind of funny who did a whole kind of exercise and stuff, and they died young. But then I thought, no, I guess that's kind of depressing. So I took those jokes off the thing. But in the context, it's funny. Like the guy who invented cardiovascular running as exercise, he didn't make it till 50. And the guy who came up with Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders, he died at 94.
Yeah. It's funny when every time they interview some old person and they're like over 100 years old, what's your secret to success? Cigars and whiskey. Seriously?
Yeah.
Seriously?
I really think when you see those stories, I think it has a lot to do with your mental state, your mental contentment, with life in general, and your contentment with God and in your belief system, and things that don't worry you to death. As the saying goes, we really do our body harm by our mental state, and we put ourselves in such a contorted state mentally that our body suffers tremendously as a result. And I'm not saying that people under a great deal of stress haven't lived long lives, but I think there's a lot to it, and maybe what you eat doesn't have such a big role in your health as your mental state does. And God's word gives you mental tranquility in your life, and when you feel that and you know that you have God on your side, it gives you a great deal of tranquility, and I believe that is very helpful.
Yeah.
Helpful. I mean,
this is the only people. I mean, when I was young, people would, you would hear people, they're always asking the question, who am I? Screaming out in the woods and asking that kind of weird stuff that went on back in the 70s and that. But we know the answer. No one's going to listen to us, but we know the answer, and we don't doubt the answer like many people do in religion of all types. They go through the motions, I think, sometimes, and don't really wholeheartedly believe what the reason they don't believe it because half of it doesn't make sense, including normal Christian, regular Christianity, heaven and hell and all that makes no sense. But so I don't think they get to the point that you just said, Stan, that when you understand it, you have to get to the point where there's tranquility. You know what to expect.
You answer the big questions of life. You don't stand out in the woods and scream, what's the purpose of my life?
Right.
Why am I here? You begin to understand what the purpose of your life is and where you're going and what your goals are and what you're supposed to be doing while you're here. And so it changes your perspective on your job, the way you deal with your boss, the way you deal with traffic, with people out here in the world. You just have this automatic reaction in a way of dealing with it that is frustrating. I'm not saying it's not frustrating, but the bottom line is you understand what's going on and why the world is the way it is. And your side of the story is I have salvation and grace through God and Jesus Christ. And it's not always going to be this way. And I think that's important to know that.
And you know what? And that's the reason, from the least to the greatest of the people that are called out, which is probably a very thin margin between the two, based on the people in the rest of the world will turn to those people. They will turn to those people because we're not going to be as bent out of shape as the rest of the planet is. we got to remember that when times
Or
do
losing-
get tough. Don't
or
revert.
losing-
Yeah.
Are losing when the world begins to come apart. We're not going to be sitting here losing our mind because we expected this. We knew it was coming as a result of man's sin. And so I had a conversation last night with a gentleman, good conversation. This very subject came up, and we were talking about that very thing, that at that point in time is when Timothy came to bear. When the world turned upside down in his day, Timothy had this armor of God on him that was given to him through Paul and the teachings of Paul. And he was prepared, and he probably did a ministry like no other evangelist. And we don't have any record of it. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that were out there in the world that had heard all of Paul's preaching and rejected it probably came screaming to Timothy, "What's happening? You guys been talking about this for 40 years. And now here it is. What do we do?" And you might be given a call at that moment to give an answer for the faith and the hope that lies within you. And it will be a calming effect, I believe.
Timothy could very well be us.
Yeah.
This is written for Timothy, but it is a message for us. The
Sure.
whole of the New Testament is a message for the people who have to endure the final days of this current world. And we've got to remember this. We got to recall all this and hang on to it when we're in this position. Any time between now and the next 6 months, we talked about it, the world could erupt and I mean, it's just hanging on a thin thread that it's not completely flown apart anyway. And we have to
talked
keep
about
our head
that
about
last
it,
night,
because when
yeah.
you panic, and I'll preface this with die in our world, the way a called out Christian, die means lose salvation. And when you panic and when you have fear in your heart and you panic when things get tight is when you die.
Yeah.
So we can't do that.
Yeah, because you make irrational decisions.
Exactly.
But, if, let's say, for instance, say the economy were to collapse. We had a Great Depression as they did in 1920, 97. Ours is going to be 100 times worse as a world because we're so interconnected. But you add to that a war, and you add to it, unrest in our nation. All of these things happening simultaneous, people are going to lose their minds. They have no concrete sense of reality anymore. They don't have a foundation anymore. They're going to be looking for answers, and I think that will be a time when they're willing to listen and to hear at that moment. And I think it'll be their minds will be ready to hear and listen to what maybe they ignored for the whole of their life.
There will be two camps with answers. Our very tiny camp of Christians and Satan's camp.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which one are you going to follow?
Yeah.
And here's the thought. We've often thought that either world depression and bad things happening to Israel will make them build the third temple, but also it will push Europe into looking for a strongman savior dictator, like what happened with the Weimar Republic and Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And right now, Europe is very unstable. Like France, a major country in Europe, no one has a majority in parliament. And they've got an uneasy alliance between the far left and the center left to keep the conservatives, who got the most votes of any party, out of power.
Mm-hmm.
But it won't, everyone says it won't last. It's just a question of, I don't know, how the frustration of the voters will work out over there. And, it's hard to know. But I'm thinking the people of Europe are going to be looking for someone, they're going to need a good leader.
Yep.
A superhero.
Yep.
They're going to be looking for a super dictator, another Caesar, if you will.
Yeah.
That's going to bring us out of this mess we've made ourselves and lead us into the glorious destiny, which we all should have been enjoying all of this time. Yeah, that was Hitler's message.
Yeah.
This people of Germany, their destiny was to be a great nation. And it is your right, your destiny to be there again. And they bought it. They bought it wholesale.
I just want to point out that we are 15, quarter of 10, and we still have quite a few verses to get through.
Would you read the next verse, please, Ken? Sorry.
And this is the verse. This is the keep your head verse. This is a faithful saying, for if we died with him, we shall also live with him. If we endure, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he will also deny us.
So just got to dig in there and not deny the truth, even if it gets to be unwoke. I guess it's not cool. It's not what you're supposed to think anymore. Would you read 2 Timothy 2:15, please? One of our favorite scriptures in God's church.
Be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, but shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase to more ungodliness.
Isn't he really saying people in the church should become Bible pros?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone won't know it as well as others, but you're going to understand the Bible, so someone can easily put something over on you.
Absolutely. And I believe one of the positive side of that is rightly dividing the word of truth. But the negative side, but maybe more importantly, is avoid all the vain babbling and the confusing language, because it can lead you astray, get you on a course that God never intended for you.
Yeah. And the internet's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
It's got
I guess that's true of television too, but a lot of weird things are out there, right?
It's got a lot of good answers, but it's got a lot of bad answers and wrong answers too.
And just because it's on Wikipedia, especially when it comes to the Bible, you cannot necessarily believe it. Wikipedia has been massaged by leftists and mismanaged. At least that's what I believe. So a lot of things are accurate, but you can't always be sure of that.
Wikipedia is completely unreliable. Don't use it. Unless it's some, very, neutral thing that you're looking up. But for the most part, Wikipedia is garbage.
I think it's been intentionally infested by far leftists and others. So it's not the encyclopedia it used to be. And I think it's going to be a struggle in the future to maintain sound doctrine. Now, this isn't the book we're going into, but when Christ was asked by his disciples, how do you know when the end is coming? The first thing he said, number one, is don't let someone deceive you.
Yeah.
Right. Avoid religious deception. Yep.
So, Ken, could you read 2 Timothy 3? This is obviously a shocking scripture, but one we need to think about.
But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And from such people turn away, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And we are living in that time right now.
Yes, we are.
And I thought of something. Someone could say, well, the end didn't come in Timothy's lifetime. I think these events come in waves. There was a wave, an end time type wave toward the end of that first century, where a lot of false religion and bad things happened, like the fall of Jerusalem. So it wasn't totally false for Paul to write this to Timothy, but the message to us, since we're going to be at the big wave at the very end, it's more important to us than it was even in Timothy's time.
Yeah. We sort of, that conversation I was mentioned earlier last night, we you have to think about knowledge being increased, as Daniel wrote, a time when knowledge would be increased. And if you go back to my grandmother's age, 100 years ago, she came down to Texas in a covered wagon, to now really, and we live in an age where we go into space almost every month. It seems like someone's going to space and traveling and living up there on the space station, to computer technology, AI, whatever you want to call it. You got to agree that knowledge is exponentially increased certainly in the last 50 or 60 years, incredibly. 1982 was the outbreak of the personal computer, wasn't it? Like 82. So look how far we've come since 1982, 40 years. And here we are. So you have to wonder, are we getting close to that moment in time when and that was the point I was going to make is, yes, all of these things that Bible talks about and that other generations have suffered are going to come to a pinnacle, a climax at the very time Jesus spoke of as the last days. They're all going to be at their peak, and he is going to have to reach in and save us from it.
Knowledge is increased to unbelievable levels, and people are dumber than ever. I'm just sorry I said that. Maybe I should edit this out. But man, people are just some of the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. I see online.
Isn't that what the verse just said, though? They're always learning.
Yeah, yes.
And never able to come to the knowledge of the truth.
You got it. You're right.
A form of godliness. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I'm about to say, we could go into it. We're not going to, but there is so many examples that we could all pull for today's society and that verse.
Oh, yeah.
It's like there'll be something that'll be hot for a while, and then it'll be debunked, and then they'll come back to something else that, like, they're going around and around and around, but they never come to a real conclusion of the knowledge of the real truth.
Yeah, if you think about it, there's a whole industry that has crept up in the last 10, 15 years with podcasts and people that have gone off on their own in the media and in reporters and that. The whole industry exists to debunk the lies told on a daily basis. Their job is to go through the media and tell you what they're lying about. And they make money doing it because people want to know what the truth is.
When you look at this letter that Paul wrote to Timothy, and there is most of the commentaries agree that Timothy wrote this letter because he uses his name in it. He talks about his history, and there are a lot of Pauline statements made in it. But the point I wanted to make is there are historians all the way back to Tertullian and Irenaeus that agree that Paul wrote this letter. And yet in the modern era, there are those that decided, no, Paul didn't write this letter. He didn't write it. They don't agree that he wrote the letter. It's like all the evidence is pointing to the fact that Paul wrote this, and yet there's always some goofball out there that decides he knows more than all of these historians, from history, and they seem to want to disagree rather than agree.
There's one bad part of academia. You got to get published. And in a lot of fields, you got to say something contrary to established thought, especially if it's traditional Christian mainland thought, even more so. And that'll get you published. What pillar of knowledge can I whack down?
Yeah, exactly. What dramatic statement could I make to upset, traditional Christian values or traditional beliefs in the Christian system? You could go out probably tomorrow and write a book and make some wild statement like that, and you would gain attention. You certainly would.
Hey, Ken, how about if we jump the next two scriptures? They're basically about how the Bible is there for inspiration and help. We kind of agree with that. And I'm glad he told Timothy that. But why don't we move to 2 Timothy 4, verse 3 and 4? Can we do that?
We just did it.
Okay.
For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. But you, in the watchful of all things, you be watchful of all in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry.
He's sort of showing, be a watchdog to fight this itching ear thing. And you can almost sense people, if you want a good church that's going to pay you money, don't preach about people shacking up. Or but I've actually heard things like that. You've heard things like that, haven't you?
Yeah. I like what he wrote there at the end. Fulfill your ministry. That's almost an instruction to every one of us in our personal Christian life. Fulfill your ministry. Fulfill what God gave you, your calling and your destiny to be in His family, and being a child of God. Fulfill your commitment to God, because it's a very short time. Whether you're a teenager, a young adult, or whether you're in your 80s, you realize that time goes by very quickly. And I think he's just telling him and encouraging him to hang on.
Let's say, I know, and this apparently happened to some people, I've been told. You have an itching ear. You want to be able to eat lobster and all that's, or fried in butter and all that sort of thing. And if only the church would give up those unclean meat things, that'll make you so happy. That's what I call an itching ear.
Yeah.
Or this one minister, I talked to him, anyone going, Seventh-day Adventists, they know that Christmas has pagan ties. But the minister said, it's in a city here in Missouri, we're doing this for the mothers, and the mothers are doing it for their children. And that's why we decorate the stage. He's saying, we really know the truth, but can you see he's giving in to itching ears?
That's even worse than not knowing the truth and not understanding what you're doing, than knowing the truth and openly defying God anyway.
But he's got to keep the people happy, you see?
So he's got to keep the money flowing. That's what he's got to, it's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah. But we have to avoid that. If there's something you want to do, but it's unbiblical, you just got to go God's way in spite of what you want.
Well, itching ears to me too, it sort of indicates that someone is looking for a reason to leave. They want to hear what they want to hear because they're not fully convicted. And so they're looking for someone to tell them, I don't have to do this anymore. And that's rather sad. They're looking for a way out of God, being committed to God and obeying His laws and the things that are required of us, because they don't want to suffer any discomfort at all. And that's, I think, is a rejection of building character and drawing closer to God. Sounds like we're out of time.
Yeah, that's that Big Ben letting us know that we're getting close to the end here. But it was a great discussion. Could you read 2 Timothy 4:6, please, Ken?
For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved His appearing.
We want to be in that second category of those who are fighting the good fight because we love Christ's appearance.
Yeah, absolutely. He's talking to us directly when he says, to all those who love His appearing. I think it's a reaching out into the future to all of those that were followers.
And then I think his last farewell message to Timothy in love is kind of 2 Timothy 4:9. Can we read that, Ken? As our last scripture.
Be diligent to come to me quickly, and the Lord will deliver me from every evil work and preserve me for his heavenly kingdom. Him be glory forever and ever. Amen.
So I assume Timothy got to Rome to spend some time with Paul before his martyrdom. Um, and I do think we will see a world with more intolerance as we get closer to the end, whenever that comes. So we're going to have to brace ourselves for people that will be intolerant of those that don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to become more and more difficult, I believe, to hold the line and to walk this, the straight and narrow, as Jesus said. The wide is the gate that leads to destruction, the path, but narrow is the gate that leads to life. So we have to walk a very thin line.
And our reward will be great. Paul says the suffering of this world cannot be compared with the glory that we're going to get. And so just got to keep that in mind. A great reward awaits us. And many of us won't have to go through too much. It depends on different people have different programs, and not be ashamed of the Bible. And just on world events, I want to just discuss this for just a few minutes. I'm going to assume when you think about President Trump turning his head, because probably the kid had the back of his head scoped up when he pulled the trigger. But as that bullet left, and obviously the timing had to be perfect, God worked it out to it, that he was in the process of turning his head to look at the chart, and the bullet just grazed his ear. And instead of the back of his head blowing up like a watermelon being hit with a shotgun, which would have been horrible on national TV.
Yeah.
And there are two thoughts I have about it. Number one, the Secret Service, was it incompetence that they let the guy get up on the roof? Or two, was it done intentionally with a wink and a nod, hoping that something would happen to him? Because we now know that they knew the Iranians had a hit out on Trump a week or two ago, and they knew that. So there'd be no reason for them to me, if you're assessing risk assessment, Trump would be the hottest target in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, every day something new comes out. If you follow Bongino at all, because he was a former Secret Service, and he's got a radio program and a podcast. Just so you know, his podcast, he likes to let the cuss words fly a lot on that podcast. But he would know more than anybody in the media about what happened, and he's been and all the people that work there, he knows so many of them. They're calling him and telling him stuff. So if you watch what he's been saying, it's just amazing where we're at today. Yesterday we found out that this kid had 3 offshore accounts. What's a 20-year-old doing with 3 offshore accounts? And they called them encrypted accounts, which tells me they were like Bitcoin, electronic funds is what they were, something that's untraceable. 3 of them.
Yeah, this thing is going to continue to, like the Kennedy assassination, it's going to continue to grow and become a monster of its own, the story. Mm-hmm. And all of the evidence is going to continue to come out about this. We will be hearing this for the next year probably, of who all was associated with this and how and why. If this was an intentional act, I mean, it gives you the depth of corruption and willingness to take the life of a former president. Now that's deep. That is a deep cancer within our society and within our country. And maybe it's not within our country. Maybe it is foreigners trying to take him out. But how they missed that. I mean, any 2-year-old would know, or any 8th grader would know that was a perfect position for someone to take a shot at that at President Trump, and it's sad that they neglect the neglect that was involved in that. When you look at all the angles and the people that saw him up on that roof, and even 10 minutes before it happened, we won't be surprised at some of the evidence that comes out. I don't believe we'll be shocked. Those of us that have been watching and knowing what's going on in the corruption in our country.
Yeah, there's only two options: complete incompetence, or the situation was allowed to transpire the way it did.
Yeah, you know, the snipers that I heard interviewed said this was a elementary shot for anyone in their first level of of sniper training
With iron sights too, not even a scope.
Yeah, I mean, just this is one you make. If you don't make this, you're not even allowed in the class because you can't make that shot. You're not obviously have no talent whatsoever. And this kid had already been through that training, and it had the ability. I like, in my heart of hearts, like to think that this was divine intervention, that God protected him, because there's no way that sniper should have missed that shot.
And maybe he had him scope the back of his head, and as he pulled the trigger, God had, had his head move, and maybe the wind pushed the bullet just enough to rake the top of his ear off. But I'm still going back to the question of incompetence. I know everybody wants, equity and DEI and all that stuff, but somehow, don't you get the feeling if Biden picked her, don't most of Biden's picks look incompetent?
Yeah. Actually, what's her name picked this woman? Because I think she guarded her when she was the vice president's, when her husband was vice president. Jill picked her.
Oh, Jill
Yeah,
picked her.
Jill picked her.
Well, that still doesn't give me a whole lot
that's
of
even
faith.
worse.
It makes you wonder. And it could have been both incompetence and they wanted to leave an opening, hoping it would happen.
Yeah.
But also, I heard a news broadcast, we still don't know the motive. And I think something is wrong.
I mean, isn't the motive obvious, or am I missing something?
But that's what the media said. They can't figure out why this guy did it. Something is weird. I feel that they're holding information back from us.
Yeah,
that's because they are.
Because wouldn't by now they cracked his phone and cracked his emails and talked to enough people that they should know a fair amount about him. But if it isn't politically helpful to the left, I think the FBI, they suppress it. That's what I'm thinking.
Very well could be. We can't trust anything anymore. So it's a shame.
Even the CIA can't be trusted. And you look at world affairs, how does this make America look?
It looks like it's topsy-turvy.
The Three Stooges are running everything.
Yeah. We look like a banana republic.
Me and Chris were talking before the show, before tonight's podcast. Do you see, and you alluded to this somewhat, Dr. Ricks, earlier in the program, can you see that there's a certain amount of humility as a result of what happened to Trump in his speech? I detected that. I think maybe this was something that God allowed to happen, to be a near miss, so that it would affect, pride, whatever it is that makes leaders, drunk with their own power, to make him realize that, he came that close, and it was probably under divine. I believe he believes that it was divine intervention, that he wasn't killed as well, because he sort of indicated that last night in his speech. But it certainly would affect, I think it certainly affected his demeanor to some degree. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's a good thing.
All right. Well, if that's everybody's, we don't have anything else to add, then I guess this will be the end. All right.
Great show, guys,
All
tonight.
Right. All right.
Good show.
Good show.
Enjoyed it very much.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I'll say then, good night, everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful Sabbath, and we'll see you back here again next week.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.